Well, Senator Ono, thank you so much, and thank you for everyone who's put this together, and thank you to all of our great panelists for being here and all of your work in this arena. I just want to start by sharing some of what I heard last week when I spoke to some young people in Washington State who recently came to the U.S. via the southern border. And the experiences that these children shared about crossing the border were really more than any person could endure. But what troubled me even more, and that was before they got to the border, but what troubled me even more was what I heard about from these children about what happened to them when they were in our custody, U.S. custody. They were denied showers for days. They were being fed, and I quote, terrible food thrown to them on the floor without even enough to go around. Thrown to them on the floor. They were being told not to touch other scared and suffering children for fear of spreading disease and being spoken to and treated like animals. So no human contact. Don't touch anybody. I could go on. It was just horrendous what I heard. And I know this has been reported in numerous places, but I just want to make it clear, we cannot let this stand. And I'm proud that we are here today standing up, learning what we can, and making a stand that as Democrats in particular, we're going to take care of these children and do everything we can to fight for them. Senator Ono asked the question I wanted to ask you, Dr. Cohen, about the long-term impact of these kids in our custody. I'm a former preschool teacher, and I'm fully aware that what happens to young people lasts a lifetime, and the impacts can be devastating. And you talked about the toxic stress and some of the other things, and we have to be aware that in our custody, this is what we are doing to a child for a lifetime, and we're responsible for that. So I appreciated the answer to that, but I also wanted to ask you, Dr. Cohen, given the conditions our own government is allowing for these children, we know that ORR facilities are now seeing children that are sicker and have experienced more severe trauma. What can we do to make sure they're getting the care and services they need as a result of those experiences? What can we be standing for? What should we be fighting for these kids?
Once again, as I mentioned in my testimony, I really think that, as many people have said, we must have more transparency. There must be the capacity for professional interdisciplinary groups to go into these facilities, to see what's going on in there, to monitor what's happening with these children. Unfortunately, because the baseline people working at these facilities are frequently overwhelmed, don't have experience in dealing with traumatized children, they become more rigid. The children's behavior tends to worsen as time goes on in these facilities, and they become more and more traumatized. Then what happens is that they get moved to what they call higher levels of care, which are not necessarily care at all. They're higher levels of restriction. There are some facilities, for example, that were never shared with Florida's attorneys as being used by the government, calling themselves residential treatment centers. One of them in Arkansas, children who were sent there were assigned to clinicians who spoke no Spanish. They were put on multiple medications, never seen by a child psychiatrist. If you asked them, they had no idea why they were there. So there must be independent monitoring of these facilities and reports back to Congress about what's found by pediatricians, by child psychiatrists, by child welfare people, who are also monitoring issues around release and the ways in which release is being managed as well.
Okay, thank you. Really important. Ms. Fry, I really appreciate the work you do to make sure that these kids have access to legal and medical services. I'm hoping that you can put some perspective on the urgency of this current crisis by talking about how you see the conditions now versus what you have seen in the past.
The 2017 order, that 34 pages, that talks about and describes the deplorable conditions in the Rio Grande Valley, those conditions are the same. Nothing has changed. What has changed in the intervening time is the way children are held. They are held for long periods of time, and they are packed together in tight spaces. We talked to children who were held in spaces where they couldn't lay down. There wasn't enough space. So children had to stand, and they recycled. The child who lay down first got the space. I talked with a mother whose cage was so crowded, it was mothers and children, that she had a 1.5-year-old. She couldn't put him down. They'd been there 15 days. When they saw us, we were in an office, she put him on the floor, and he was like a wild animal. He was running all around. He's crawling. He's jumping. He said he was crazy. He was crazy. So I think we're seeing more extreme conditions because we are seeing longer periods of detention. That explains the spread of disease. If you don't hold children so long, you don't have as much opportunity to spread disease. Influenza A is spread in the air. That's why I got it. So you pack kids in a cage. One kid gets the flu, and they sneeze, or they lay down, or they put their hand there, and then another child touches it. Now you've got 5 kids with the flu. You pack kids in, everybody gets the flu. So when you have a crisis like that, how do you manage it? You manage that by having independent pediatricians who are more than willing to volunteer to come in and take care of that if you have that crisis existing.
Are they not allowed in?
No, they're not allowed in. And in fact, we had testimony in the House Oversight Committee by a doctor from El Paso who had a large group of doctors, 100, that were ready to go into the Clint facility and had volunteered, had gone in 2016 and provided care. They were absolutely, prevented from doing that. Now, it's very interesting and very telling that the number of children had swelled. And as soon as all this stuff came out in the media, and I must say, everything that has happened is on the back of one indigenous Guatemalan girl and one premature baby. Flores has absolute confidentiality. I've been on hundreds of visits. You can't get me to talk about them. But when I couldn't get that mom and baby released, I didn't have any choice. I'm not going to let a baby die because I can't tell anybody. So I went to the news media. Because we had broken the confidentiality of Flores there, when we saw the horrendous conditions of Clint, a decision was made, since we had already done it, to break the confidentiality again. So it's the government who didn't take care of baby Kay and her mom, but we have that single act and that girl to thank for the fact that the American people now know and understand what we are doing in our name, the cruel, sadistic, and inhuman behavior that we're inflicting on children day after day after day, week after week. I met a girl that was there 30 days with a baby under 1. 30 days, she'd had 2 showers. The baby was sallow. He was motionless. We're doing this to people, and we need to stop.
And it's because they're there longer, not because there's more of them coming.
There may be more coming, but they don't have to be there. I think my colleagues discussed the ORR system. If the ORR system, when you have for-profit contractors, you have no incentives to release children because you get a per head, per bed, per day amount. So you're sluggish. You manage the release. The release people work for you, so you're just sluggish about it. If ORR were an agency dedicated to release and not detention, and release were managed, and there are many good ideas for that, you would turn kids quickly. You would always have a bed. Sponsors, family are waiting to be reunified with them. You would never need an influx center, and you would never have a backup at CBP, and you would never have to appropriate a penny towards detention, ever.
Thank you. Yes, did you want
If I can just add for one moment, there's also a memorandum of agreement that is very problematic between ICE and ORR, which hands information about any sponsor trying to come claim that child over to law enforcement, to ICE. And we had a series of raids one summer under this administration in which parents were detained and deported for coming to claim their children. That has created another reason that it's harder and more complicated to get kids to their families. And again, it's using kids as pawns for political purposes.
Thank you. Dr. Cohen, and then I know my time's up.
Yeah, I think the other thing that I want to add to what Hope was saying is that it's more than just the number of kids in the CPB facilities. Those conditions where there's no sunlight, there's no ventilation, where already sets up a perfect condition for the growth of bacteria or viruses. You add to that the stressors that reduce on the other side children's capacity to fight off infections. So you keep them awake all night. You keep lights on all night, which we know chronic illumination actually damages the brains of children directly. you put them in incredible situations of stress and hardship, all of that impairs the immune system as well. So it is really a system that's designed to make children ill. It really is.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Marie.